This episode is brought to you by CPS Capital, a boutique corporate finance and stockbroking firm located in Perth and Melbourne, and they provide special advice to retail, sophisticated and institutional investors within Australia and around the world. For more information, head to www.cpscapital.com.au. So hello, I'm Ben Kostrich and this is the Market Bull podcast. Joining me in the studio today, I've spoken with him quite a few times and all over the last couple months and weeks, is Fergus Kiley, the Managing Director of Mount Hope Mining, which is soon to be listed on the ASX. So it's one of the few IPOs to go on the ASX this year, and we'll talk about that later. It will be going under the code MHM, so keep an eye out that. But firstly, welcome, Fergus.
Thank you very much, Ben. It's, as always, a pleasure to see you again.
Yeah, we've had a few conversations over the past couple of weeks, and there's a lot of, I can say from yourself, a lot of interest in this company and what it's about. So, I mean, first off, before we dive through that, just give us a little overview about who you are as a person and your experience throughout mining and how it's put you to be the founder and managing director of Mount Hope Mining.
Yeah, geologist originally. From Adelaide, actually, South Australia. So not necessarily West Australian born and bred, but as working in mining, you typically in Australia you might end up over west. So, but a bit about my background. So started education and out of Adelaide University, then started working for Newmont in the Tanami. Did a few years there. Then I was in and around Broken Hill and the Curnamona with a company called Havilah Resources, and then I took a bit of a break and shot overseas for a few years, or for a year. This was sort of 2014 when the mining industry had sort of, there was very little work on. Quite enjoyed the travel aspect, so picked up some work predominantly through the Tethyan Belt, through Serbia, Bulgaria, Armenia, Georgia, that area, doing some grassroots exploration stuff and trying to put a few deals together myself. It was a great experience, but sort of there wasn't a huge amount of longevity in it. And then found my way back to Australia, to Western Australia in 18-19, was working for a gold mining company. And then recently I sort of spent 3 or 4 years working for Wyloo, which is the private investment vehicle for the Forrest Family Office, so the mining related one. So I had 3-4 years, very informative years there, working with the pretty exceptional team there, and then most recently was working for Nico Resources NC1, assisting with the project studies and development for the sort of massive Wingalina nickel laterite project. And so I guess my background is in project generation, whether it's exploration or managing the investment portfolio, assisting with the technical part of the investment portfolio for the Wyloo guys. So that sort of led me to develop the skill set that I use to identify projects such as the Mount Hope project, which is the the namesake of the company. And so the Mount Hope project is located in Cobar. It's got many attributes that I look for, particularly in an early stage exploration company. I find that when it comes to early exploration companies or companies that sort of had the lower market valuation, you want to have multiple levers to pull for value accretion. I'm sure, many of the Market Bull podcast listeners would be familiar with exploration companies that, they might have started in a particular commodity, and then the interest in the commodity has fallen away for whatever reason, or maybe they're in a jurisdiction and then interest in the jurisdiction falls away or something like that. And so for me, thinking about how to create value in this end of the market, it's really important to have multiple levers that you can pull on, because if you are the one trick pony or the one horse in the race, you effectively live and die by whatever that attribute is. Yeah. And so Cobar is really interesting because it's going through a renaissance right now. There's a significant amount of corporate activity throughout the basin. You've seen, recent transactions like Metals Acquisition Corp purchasing the CSA mine for US $1.1 billion last year. Another ASX-listed company, Polymetals, has recently acquired the Endeavour lead zinc silver mine from Toho Zinc. They're just two recent stories. Aurelia has put the Federation mine into production only in this last quarter, and that was a greenfields discovery to an operating mine in under 5 years. And then not to mention, the exploration sort of success that's around there. All of that is to say that the tailwind outside of the project itself and within our project portfolio, we've got 5 sort of high quality targets, but our tenure is within a really active belt, and that active belt has, a lot of corporate activity going for it. And so, it's just another avenue that keeps eyeballs on the area, and that naturally encourages investors, when they're looking for, relative valuation points or something to get in to find value. That's what attracted me to Mount Hope. So that's the area in general. The target portfolio, I'm sure
we will get into that.
over.
Yeah, but quickly, zooming out, we probably should have mentioned, or yourself, about the history of this. So we're talking about the Cobar Basin, and that's in New South Wales, part of Australia. But there's quite a substantial amount of history, and as you said, it's quite a creditable area. But there's certain proportions of it that we've talked about in regards to the top end, and then progressively as we go down. But without saying all of that, can you just elaborate a bit more about the history of the Cobar Basin, and more so, why has this become such an attractive product or portfolio product for you, and why you're sort of pursuing this so much and seeing such an interest from investors about it?
Yeah, so the Cobar itself, mining and exploration activities have occurred there since the 1870s. So mining in Cobar actually predates Broken Hill, for example, thinking of other significant New South Wales mining and exploration epicentres. So that's pretty incredible when you think about it. So there's been over 150 years of mining and exploration activities. The belt is prolific in the sense that it's produced a significant amount of metal. It's produced over 4 million tonnes of copper, 3 million ounces of gold, and significant amounts of lead, zinc, and silver. The deposits that occur there are polymetallic, so there's copper, gold, and lead, zinc, silver systems. It's a VMS belt. It's known globally for having an exceptionally high grade or high tenor of sulfide for the projects that form there. The CSA mine, which I spoke about before, I believe that's the second or third highest grade copper mine in production globally right now. And so when I think about looking for investment opportunities or building a portfolio from an exploration and investment perspective, certainly when I start with technical, I look for an investment thesis to follow, and so I'm quite bullish on copper and gold in the medium and long term. If you believe that we've got a lot of electrification to undertake,
Copper plays a major part in that.
Exactly. You hear the likes of people like Robert Friedland saying that copper is the new oil. So looking at Australia's preeminent copper mining belts, the Cobar ranks as one of the top 3 along with Mount Isa and the Gawler Craton. So there's a tick. So when I'm looking for projects, I like to be in prolific mining jurisdictions that have a proven history of resource development and extraction. And then it's about finding high quality acreage within that belt of rocks, and then, exploring that bit of acreage. Now, the southern part of the basin where our tenure is, the exploration thesis here as to why this tenement portfolio is attractive for us is that the majority of the basinal activities, the mining and exploration activities, occurred in the north and the central part of the basin, around the preeminent mines like CSA, Endeavour in the north, Namaji, Hera, Federation in the central part. That same structural architecture that denotes where these mines occur, it starts in the north, extends through central and down into the south. And it just so happens that a lot of dedicated exploration work has not really occurred in the southern part of the basin, despite having the same characteristics that control mineralisation in the central and the north part being existing in that south. And so therefore, to me, that presents a really simple to understand concept that if we take the geological model that controls where mineralisation occurs in the north and the central part, a model that's demonstrated success via discovery over, a series of historic and currently active mines, we take that model and we apply the characteristics of that to exploration in the south, where we've got the same features that should lead to further exploration success. And so when you're thinking about building a portfolio of exploration targets, being able to de-risk by, having either a proven model or maybe there's an exploration technique or something along those lines, those are the type of opportunities that I find really attractive, because you're trying to reduce or increase your statistical chance of finding a discovery.
And we've had conversations, again, talking about why this area hasn't really been explored and untapped and really is open pegging. But how did you come across and get access to these projects and these targets that we'll talk about? How did they fall or come across your desk? And when did you manage to really start actively getting access to them and now, running this as the main part of the IPO process and the story to tell investors?
Yeah, so the company or the assets are effectively a spin out of another Australian or ASX listed silver development company called Unico Silver, ticker symbols USL. So these assets sat in Unico's portfolio for many years. In fact, since 2017, when the company listed on half of the tenement portfolio plus an additional project in New Zealand. A couple of years into their journey, Unico, or at the time back then it was called E2 Metals, and it's now changed. When it changed its direction and focus towards exploring South America for silver, and now into a development stage company with the recent Joaquin transaction, the portfolio, the Cobar portfolio, just did not. There was zero value ascribed to it in their company, and their company was not the right asset to advance Cobar. You're not, equity investors in Unico aren't there for Cobar exposure. They're for Argentinian silver development. So the Unico board recognised that this was the case, and that the best way for them to create value for their shareholders for this project was to put it into its own vehicle, give it dedicated management and access to capital, and retain some sort of
equity in it.
Exactly. And so the managing director of Unico Silver is a gentleman called Todd Williams. Todd Williams is also from Adelaide and went to Adelaide University, and so that's where we crossed paths many years ago, and so we've maintained a strong relationship since those days. I've always known about this particular project since Todd stepped into the managing director role at Unico Silver. Recognised that it was a high quality asset, but for various reasons
they couldn't deploy capital and assets and attention towards it.
Exactly. Yep. And so I guess with my history and skill set, looking at asset identification, this has always screamed at me as a high quality target portfolio. And it's on the doorstep of a historic producing mine, like the township of Mount Hope is simply there because there was the Mount Hope copper mines, the historic mine in the area. So there's a lot of indicators in this project why I was attracted to it, and so having the opportunity to spin it out into its own company and step in as one of the founders and managing directors to do that, it was a no-brainer for me to take that on. And so the deal that we did with Unico was also, it was a really solid transaction for both parties because it was an all-scrip deal. Unico ended up with 12% of the pro forma company post the capital raise. Their stock's escrowed for 12 months. It's held at the headco level. And importantly, Todd joins the board of Mount Hope Mining as a non-executive director to assist with that sort of continuity of handing over the stakeholder relationships. And, all the data was in an exceptional state as it was. Yeah. And so, we've been able to really fast track this IPO because, one, I knew about the asset sort of from previous dealings. Two, working with Todd and the Unico board was a really fast and swift process. And three, there was an attraction on their side because they could see how they could, create value for their shareholders. And so we're all swimming in the same direction, and we've managed to get towards the end of 2024 and get an IPO away, which is one of the only IPOs or get an IPO away in a market that I believe this is the lowest number of IPOs that have been listed on the ASX since 2011. So that in itself has got to speak to the quality of the asset portfolio.
And speaking of the asset portfolio, I mean, there's quite a few of them in there. Mount Hope East, there's the Black Hill, Main Road East, Little Mount Solitary, and Mount Solitary to Mount Salar. I think I've said most of them correctly. Hopefully, we'll wait and see. But I mean, if we start going through a few of those, I mean, realistically, there's the flagship or the one that screams out to you the most initially. I mean, which one of those is the sort of the flagship, if I could call it that, to start?
Yeah, it's that's a good question. I get asked that by investors all the time, and my answer to that is I don't have a flagship target within those five. Yeah. But what we have as a company is the first four that you mentioned: Mount Hope East, Black Hill, Little Mount Solitary, and Main Road East. They are four of your classic Cobar style polymetallic VMS, high-grade VMS targets, all of which have never been drill tested before. They've got various aspects that add to their attractiveness from a targeting perspective, but all four of them still need a small amount of work to bring them all to a drill-ready target. And so this is why no one particular target is my favourite, but all four of these targets.
And they've all got slightly differences about them that is attractive in its own way.
Yeah, and I can't wait to get out and commence work and drill these because all four of them have never been drill tested. So, for example, Mount Hope East is 1.2 kilometres northeast of the historic Mount Hope mine. Now, Mount Hope was a single isolated massive sulfide lode. It was 15 metres wide at its maximum point, but, a couple of metres at the top and the bottom, and it pinched out. The old timers mined the mine out. But the important part about this story and why Mount Hope is integral to our value proposition is they found it in 1878. They mined it till 1919. They mined 75,000 tonnes at 10.5% copper. Now, that grade is exceptionally high and is a fingerprint of Cobar-style mineralisation. So I mentioned our thesis is the same criteria that controls mineralisation in the north and south. In the north and central part, extends in the south. And just as a function of being next door to the historic Mount Hope copper mine, I believe from a geological perspective that we have de-risked the question, does that style of mineralisation occur in the south? I believe it does, and now it's about finding more of it on our tenure. So we have Mount Hope East. It's 1.2 k's northeast of the historic Mount Hope copper mine. If you go back to the turn of the 19th century, the old timers back then, it's not like we had modern exploration tools like geophysics, EM, IP, even the ability to map structure undercover using like magnetics and gravity, etc. So they would have mined to the end of the mineralisation.
And then gone, we're happy, that's enough for us.
Packed up, moved on. What that has resulted for us being the first, I guess, company to consolidate the broader land package and then apply modern tools, just simply like geophysics, geochemistry, magnetics, gravity for mapping, and also now having an understanding of how these systems broadly occur where they occur based off the preeminent work that a lot of people in the basin have done. We understand that this is a VMS system, so these deposits are generally occur in clusters. So if there was, at the moment, Mount Hope is one isolated massive sulfide lode. Now, if that is a true VMS system, that would be very unique to have one isolated massive sulfide lode. You would expect to see other pods of mineralisation around the area. And so therefore, taking the geological model, like a VMS deposit model, and just using modern tools, which have never really been applied here, For example, an EM, electromagnetic survey, the first EM survey that was done on our tenure was in 2021 by Unico themselves. Yeah. That's a crazy thought when you're in a VMS belt that's produced over 4 million tonnes of copper, and the first time someone's done EM around a historic copper mine that went 10.5% copper was 2021.
A few years ago, yeah.
That is wild.
Yeah.
But that's the sort of low-hanging fruit that we have, and another reason, again, why the attractiveness of this portfolio has always screamed to me as such an opportunity.
And then, again, without going through all of them probably in as much detail, I mean, all of them have got slightly different nuances to them. I mean, has this all been sort of information you've sort of been slowly inheriting, or is this, again, the excitement from your point of view is naturally you're going to have targets and start drilling, but how has the painting of all this been sort of growing, and what sort of potentially is the timelines of which ones you're going to target first, or is it all going to be, I mean, you would like to say drill them all at the same time, but that's probably not a realistic expectation. But yeah, what's some of the other details, the other ones, and when can we anticipate a bit more on-field activity?
Yeah, so the 4 targets that I was speaking about before, the Mount Hope East, Black Hill, Little Mount Solitary, Main Road East, those targets all lie in basically a 10 by 5 kilometre corridor. So the broader tenement package is 175 square Ks, but in the central part of our tenure, call it 50 square kilometres, all of these targets lie. Now, underneath that 50 square kilometre, we have 2 magnetic intrusions that have been mapped and interpreted as rhyolitic or dacitic intrusions. Now, when you're thinking about a VMS system, effectively those terms like rhyolite, dacite, it's just a geological term for volcanism. And volcanism is where your hydrothermal fluid origin could or could come from. So underneath our targets, we've got these volcanic domes. Then on the periphery of our targets, we are ring-fenced by 5 historic mines. Again, we're talking prospector, sort of turn of the 19th century, so not commercial mines like you and I would think about them today, but we have 5 evidence points of resource extraction. So we've got Mount Hope, we've got Mount Solitary. So Mount Hope was the massive sulfide, the copper-dominant massive sulfide lode. Mount Solitary is a gold dominant shear-hosted system. Mount Solar is a copper-gold dominant shear-hosted system, and then Comet and Great Central are on the western side. So we have 5 historic mines in a 10 by 5 kilometre box. In the central part of that box, we have the geology is all obscured by thin cover, and we're only talking a couple of metres to sort of 10, 20 metres here. And so where the old, like if we rewind back to the 19th century, you've got two mount or hill chains where you've got 5 historic mines on either side, and then you've got this sort of 5 kilometre trough in the middle that's covered by thin cover. And in there, and then previous operators have done geochemistry, we're doing structural mapping, etc. And we've defined these 4 target areas. We've used lead in soil anomaly. We've got the whole gamut of base metal and precious metal anomalies there, but we highlight lead because it has the highest statistical correlation for mineralisation in the basin. Gotcha. So that's where we're at now. That's what we were handed over. And so that's what I was saying. The database that E2 had collected and handed to us was in an exceptional state, and it's really allowed us to hit the ground running with this target generation. So now moving forward, and back to your point about the timeline, from our perspective, it's a pretty straightforward path. We go out and we do confirmatory soil program over the top of the 4 advanced targets. So, sorry, I'll preface this conversation with the focus of the company for the first 6 months will be on the 4 advanced targets. So we'll do confirmatory soils over the top of those target areas. Because we didn't generate the anomaly, it's prudent that we have
to go and do our own due diligence. And,
exactly. Now, coincident with doing that, we will also complete ground-based EM and IP. That hopefully should give us a target at depth, and so the combination of that will be a surface expression of geochem, so lead and copper and gold, etc., with a plate in space underneath, like hopefully an EM and an IP response plate at depth to give us something to drill out. And then because these have never been drilled before, it's simply just rolling an RC rig up and drilling a fence of holes over the top of each of these targets. And so the geochem and geophysics, or geochem and ground-based geophysics, I've targeting the first 3 months post-listing, and then the plan is to be drilling within the first 6 months, so months sort of 3 to 6. We can do that because we have all of the land access agreements in place already. There's nothing stopping us.
Took the word straight out of my mouth. That was going to be the next point I was going to get to.
Everyone always asks. So there's nothing preventing us getting on the ground and commencing work right now. And then just on the point of drilling, because there's been so much mining and exploration activity throughout the Cobar Basin, an understanding of the economic thresholds for development are really well, they're really well understood here. So generally speaking, in Cobar, most of the surface expressions of the mines can fall within a 400-metre strike surface expression. So if you have if you have a target that's 400 metres long, 150 metres wide and 200 metres deep, that's what we're planning to test. So we might drill, so I've effectively planned 300-metre spaced lines with 50-metre spaced holes. So we're talking 3 by 3, so effectively 9 holes, there or thereabouts, and RC drilling, so testing to sort of 200, 250 metres, depending on the country. If you don't drill an economic intercept or a sub-economic intercept, like if you don't drill mineralisation in that box of rock, it is unlikely that you have any sort of mineralised system or a deposit here.
Yeah.
And so therefore, the economic threshold for success is also really well understood. Too many people, particularly geologists, fall in love with their projects, and then you take shareholder capital and expel it on what ends up being a science experiment.
Yeah.
My background, that is not what I'm about. It's about testing targets with an adequate use of capital, but then having clear threshold points to understand where your go, no-go points are going forward.
Interesting. And then again, over the course of the last couple of weeks, you've been going around and speaking with a lot of investors, brokers, anyone, and there's, as expected, been a fair bit of interest. And what has really been the crux of people's appetite towards Mount Hope mining? Where have you seen most of people's attention being drawn towards?
Yeah, like it's a really good question, Ben, because the majority of the people I talk to, whether we're talking about funds, because we've had sort of small cap funds, we've had engagement from small cap funds, we've had high net worths and family offices, and we've had just your average retail investors as well. I seem to have had engagement from sort of everyone up and down that value chain. And I sort of think that the reason the response has been so well is the story is it's quite clear. Like I feel that it's quite clear. It's easy to articulate. We're in a proven belt, so it's not a question of
throwing things at a dartboard and hoping something hits.
Exactly. We're on the doorstep of 5 historic mines. We have a series of targets that are basically untested because they've been obscured by thin cover. So you can, if you put yourself back in the turn of the 19th century, you can understand why these targets haven't been found until now, because no one's sort of been looking for them undercover or had the tools or means to do so. And so, all of that wrapped up into a story, you've got expressions of a mineralised system with outcropping, where you've got, historic mines on the outcropping rock. You've got geochemistry and electromagnetic responses from the airborne and geochem work that's been done previously through this sort of valley where it's all undercover. And so now you can build a story that investors seem to be able to resonate quite well with, and can sort of see how it could be there. And then because the targets have never been tested, there's
that excitement factor of it as well.
Yeah. And I spoke earlier about, you've got to try and push the statistics of exploration in your favour. So by putting yourself in a mineralised belt, you're increasing your chances of success. By putting yourself on the doorstep of historic operating mines, you're increasing your chances of success. Having targets, that have never been tested before because they're obscured, but you can point to reasons as to why they're there. I just think that a lot of investors have resonated well with that story, and
I can imagine with a lot of the transactions that have been happening in the basin as well. That's again became quite attractive, seeing some of the activity up towards the top end of it, as you alluded to earlier. There's a lot of factors that are going, there must be potentially something quite interesting here, and that's, as expected, captivated a lot of people. When going forward, there's the whole IPO, there'll be the bell ring, and of course there's still this process now of if people are wanting to get involved and I guess download the prospectus and reach out to yourself. How can people still do that? When potentially are the book's going to be closed? When and how much time have people got to be able to potentially reach out to you and get some ideas before it does go straight onto the ASX, where people can purchase shares potentially on their own trading platforms and things like that?
Yeah, so, well, obviously depending on when we go to air, but the offer shuts on Tuesday the 19th of November. So anyone who wants to participate, all you need to do is go to www.mounthopemining.com.au, download the prospectus, the offer documents at the very end of the prospectus. You can either fill out the offer document and return it to us, being the company, or there's a hyperlink at the top of the offer document where you can do it online with Atomic directly. Atomic's our share register. So from today, there's about a week and a half until, so there's a week and 3 days until that closing date occurs. And, if investors post hearing, or potential investors, I should say, post hearing this podcast, have further questions, I encourage people to reach out to me. My line's always open, happy to talk, phone, email, etc., and give people any clarity or anything that they might need. And like I said, it's been well received, and we've already got a strong amount of interest coming in, and so we're really confident that we're going to get this one away and get out and test some of these really attractive looking targets.
Oh, fantastic. I know there's another point that we've talked about numerous times, but about the nimbleness of teams and the fact that you've got a vision to keep it, again, well-structured, capitalised, so that there's no real pointless spending on other things. It's going into the ground and on pretty much detailed targets. But alongside you, there's a few other board members, of course, and people helping develop and progress these targets. Who are some of the key people involved in Mount Hope Mining, and maybe a little bit about their history and background and their experience as well?
Yeah, so look, being a minnow or a very small exploration company, cash is king, and conserving that cash is important. So the way we've structured the company is to have minimum amount of expenditure. So at the corporate level, there's just myself and our CFO, Kosek, who's on a part-time role there at the management level. But at the board level, we've got a strong level and cross-section of experience who have sort of been assisting me with putting the original company together, the deal, and executing the IPO. So starting with our chairman, our non-exec chair is a gentleman called Ben Phillips. Ben is an executive chair of another ASX-listed company called Norfolk Metals. He also sits on the board of Many Peaks, and he has a corporate background, so he sort of has a strong history and track record in value accretion and understanding, how to put deals together and develop companies corporately. Then there's myself, and then Todd Williams, as I mentioned before, joins the board from Unico Silver. Todd is a technical person like myself, a geologist originally, but he's also demonstrated a strong sort of track record consolidating, the Santa Cruz Joaquin district. So he's got a pretty strong corporate background there as well. And then I mentioned our CFO and Kosek. It's actually working with the old man there. So my father, Paul Kiley, is...
Oh, very nice.
Yeah. So the opportunity arose. Paul had just finished his last role. So Paul, in fact, the reason why I wanted to work with Paul, other than him being my handsome, good-looking father, is Paul's not your traditional Kosek. He's got a sort of strong track record of acting in CFO or corporate development roles. So he was the Director for Corporate Development for Newmont for Asia Pacific for many years. He was the CFO at South Australian copper producer Hillgrove for many years, and most recently he was the CFO and Business Development Manager for Catalyst Metals, and Catalyst Metals most recently completed the Plutonic Gold acquisition and Henty Gold Mine acquisitions, and so Paul assisted them through there. And so really what we get there is we get a decorated sort of commercial individual on a COSEC budget. So
That's very nice.
Yeah.
It's all the people you know, hey?
Yeah, well, that's it. And so we're running a really lean operation, and the whole point is about maximising shareholder value by putting dollars in the ground, because I'm not in this to get wealthy off a salary. I'm here to make discoveries, and I want to find and build things. Like that's been my passion my entire life. Working in the natural resources sector, I've been passionate about finding things and ultimately operating projects as well. So that's what we've set this up for.
Fantastic. And going forward, of course, investors can get contact through the website. I know you've got your social pages. There's probably contact emails. And likely, as you said, there's not a massive team, so it'll be you pretty much getting back to most people emails. Yep. But, I mean, encapsulating a lot of this conversation, if there's sort of key talking points or points that you'd urge investors and listeners to remember from the conversation about Mount Hope mining going forward, what would some of those points be?
Yeah, look, I'd probably take you back to how I myself found the Mount Hope project. The project itself is a portfolio of high-quality exploration targets, advanced in that they will be drilled, in the first 6 months of listing. There's, 4, 5 shots at the dartboard there. But importantly, our project is in the right postcode. Being in Cobar, it's a prolific mining jurisdiction. Mining's well understood there. There's a significant amount of corporate activity that's already happening in the basin. For example, Metals Acquisition Corp have just raised $150 million. They've stated that inorganic growth opportunities are on the menu there. And so, I think that people who do the best in junior resource companies, typically those opportunities are the ones that have high quality exploration targets in the right belt of rocks that are drill ready when the cycle turns, and our cycles turn. Gold is running, copper is running. The time now is to be out, exploring high quality opportunities. And so that's why this project was attractive to me. And, after talking to investors, they seems to resonate with them as well.
Couldn't have said it better. Resonate, I feel, is exactly what's been happening, and watching it over the past couple of weeks in particular, and speaking with you a fair few times. I know this won't be the last time. We'll be having many more conversations in the future. But yeah, thank you so much, Fergus, for taking the time to speak with me on the show today. I'm looking forward to seeing you and the photos that come off when you do ring that bell, and looking forward to seeing all these drill results and some of the further exploration targets being developed as Mount Hope goes bigger and further. So thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Market Bull podcast. Please remember that the topics and stocks discussed in this podcast are not financial advice. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to like, share, and follow. You can follow the Market Bull on all our socials and keep up to date with global market insights.